This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 19th of May 2021, and I am Miss Gay.
I am Suam.
And I am JM. In case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. In the Daily Nation, BBI court drama. In the Standard, surprises and upsets for Big Three in polls. And in the Star, Kim Warrior Dam, shillings 3.6 billion never hit KVDA accounts.
Whoa.
That sounds like it might be our winning headline.
Oh,
You
yes.
may be right.
Ha ha ha. Anyway, let us get right to the hot topic. Let us discuss the elephant in the room, the loss of Juja.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we did not anticipate the loss.
Yes.
We must admit.
Yeah.
We planned to lose.
Yes.
No, we wanted to lose.
Yes.
We've spoken about this before.
Yeah.
The game at play is the game of chess. And Uhuru Kenyatta, as Professor Mutahi Ngunyi says, is an incredibly slow chess player.
Yeah.
So it may seem like William Ruto has a head start, but you know what? He's the only one running. Don't fall into the trap of interpreting this by-election as, you know, as an extrapolation of the nationwide sentiment towards Uhuru Kenyatta. Don't do that.
Yeah.
The strategy at play right now is the Tao of Paradox.
Yeah.
And the essence of the Tao of Paradox is this. As Professor Mutahi Ngunyi tells us, why fight a war if you can win it through deception?
Yes.
This is the question, as I'm saying, that, you know, we ask all the time. You know, to do so would be to defy logic.
Yes.
And on a side note, that is why Israel, for example, always exceeds in the battles that it fights.
Yes.
Because they are masters at deception.
Oh, absolutely.
Even this conflict currently underway, the reason Israel has the upper hand is because deception is their game of primary thrust. This past weekend, they killed over 200 Hamas jihadists and commanders in militant tunnels within Palestine. Thanks to what? Thanks to deception.
Yes.
I will let to elaborate on that story a little bit.
Yeah.
Similarly, Uhuru's game is all about deception.
Yeah.
The president, he's in power,
Yeah.
he's the incumbent.
Yeah.
His game of primary thrust is not retaining a small seat in a small, inconsequential by-election. His twofold game of primary thrust is this. One, keeping Ruto occupied constantly on irrelevancies such as by-elections and driving him into exhaustion. But number two, he is testing his political machinery for the 2022 succession. And he is testing it to see where the weak links are located. So he is tempering the sword. Tempering the sword is an important step in the sword making process. And allow me to explain this analogy to you, right? And to break down the president's state of mind, at least what I think. When a bladesmith is forging a sword, he subjects the sword to all sorts of stress.
Yes.
And he does this so that the sword can be strong enough that it can absorb massive shocks and not crack or break in the middle of battle.
Yes.
During that forging process, the bladesmith continually heats and cools the sword. He heats it to extreme high temperatures and then cools it to look for areas that have the bubbles. Now, those areas of bubbles are the areas of weakness. And then he lays that sword on the anvil and he hammers those weak areas to harden them. Now, what am I saying? William Ruto may be winning the battles, but the battles are inconsequential. Ruto may win those battles, but he will ultimately lose the war. Finally, as the Tao of Paradox says, when able, appear unable. When comfortable, appear to toil. Attack when the opponent is unprepared and appear where least expected.
Beautiful.
The 2022 victory will be secured before the 2022 election.
That's
Take
what's
it
wonderful.
back.
You know, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Let me just expound on the Israeli
Deception.
deception. Now, the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, it laid an ambush on Hamas militants. Now, the long and short of it is the IDF decided to mobilize its forces around the Gaza border. Now, tanks, artillery, created a lot of dust. Now, international media said the Israelis are mobilizing to attack Gaza. Now, what happened was the Israeli radio command got chatter from Hamas that they were actually getting into the tunnels, because there's a series of tunnels running from inside Palestine all the way to Gaza. And they had them mobilizing inside the tunnels. And in the tunnels, that's where the weapons are, all right, and communication equipment. Now, these guys enter, about 200 of them, as you say, JM, 200 of them into the tunnels. And before you know it, over 60 IDF planes bombed the heck out of the tunnels. And a lot of those militants died inside the tunnels. And if they came out, they were bombed again. All right. Now, Israel was not going to cross over into Gaza. All they just needed to do is to do a big body, hit on Hamas and take out their numbers. And I thought that was a very brilliant strategy. Deception.
Anyway,
let me look at what the Daily Nation is talking about today. In fact, the AG withdrew his application for stay orders against the execution of the BBI judgment, and he wants to pursue the same relief in the Court of Appeal.
That's right.
So according to the Daily Nation, the AG was displaying indecision. But in my view, this is his most clear and telling decision on the matter to date. And why do I say this? It is likely that the AG decided to withdraw the application from the High Court for two reasons. One, and most importantly, he did not trust the High Court to recognize their previous biases and rule in favor of the injunction. And two, he can get a similar relief from the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal can issue what they call conservatory orders to maintain the status quo if the AG can demonstrate three things. One, that he has an arguable case with the likelihood of success, which he does. Two, that the matter is of public interest, which it is. And three, he has to prove that if the order to keep the status quo is not granted, then the petition will be rendered nugatory or invalid, which it will. Therefore, all roads now lead to the Court of Appeal, and we will be on hand to break down the legalese and the games at play. But allow me to leave you with this parting shot. According to deGrasse Tyson, there are three kinds of truth. The first truth is what we call an objective truth. This is something that is true whether or not you believe it. And the methods and tools of science seek out and establish objective truths. And an objective truth cannot be later proved to be false. Let me give an example. Newton's third law of motion states that what goes up must come down if there is a force acting on it. And this force is called gravity. This truth will never change just because you do not believe it. The second kind of truth is called personal truth. This is something that is true to you in particular. So for me, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And I believe that he's everyone's Savior. But I cannot force you to believe that. You must choose to do so for yourself. The third kind of truth is the truth that I want to talk about. It's the most important kind of truth. It's called political truth. This is something that is true because it's been incessantly repeated to the point that it is believed and accepted as true. This means that I can keep telling you a lie and eventually you will believe it. In our case, the repeated lie is the lie that the Constitution cannot or should not be changed, and that BBI is unconstitutional. So the people of Linda Katiba, through their Twitter warriors, have kept on saying this, and now the public believes it, and guess what? The judiciary believes it too. But it is a lie, and I'd like to admonish you, do not get caught out on this lie.
That's fantastic. Ms. K, what are the odds that elements within the judiciary are plotting a coup?
Very high.
What are the odds that the five-judge bench that rule BBI legal is in bed with political actors? If the judiciary and the Linda Katiba team have been receiving money from Open Society, an organization that has funded regime change revolutions globally, why would a coup by the judiciary be far-fetched?
It wouldn't.
In July 2016, Turkey's President Recep Erdogan survived a coup allegedly plotted by his longtime friend, Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen. Air Force pilots, and a cabal of judges. Now, it was said that Gulen, the alleged main coup boss, ran a parallel state where high-ranking officials in Erdogan's government actually reported to him. Now, Gulen, in actual sense, ran a parallel state. Excuse me. Now, among the judges plotting the coup were two guys, and were two members of Turkey's highest court.
Equivalent of our Supreme Court.
Precisely. They were Alparslan Altan, a former vice president of the court, and Erdan Terkal. Now, I'm saying it like that, I know some Turkish. Excuse me. Now, Altan actually headed a panel of judges that in 2014 ruled that Turkey's ban on Twitter was a breach of the constitution. The second guy, Erdal Terkal, had previously praised the European Court of Human Rights for urging Turkish citizens to claim their rights. Now, these two judges were activist judges. Anyway, long story short, President Erdogan crashed the coup. And anyone who was remotely associated with the coup was either shot, rounded up, or prosecuted. And this is the fate that met the two judges. They were jailed for 11 years for trying to mess up a sitting president.
Yes, trying to mess up the executive.
Precisely. And that wasn't all. Over 2,700 judges were purged. Over 25 generals were interdicted. And over 100,000 Gulen moles in the civil service were sacked from government.
Indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, what's my point here? It is not beyond the judges not to be part of a coup scheme here in Kenya. It is not beyond activist judges to belong to a parallel clique of saboteurs who are out to plot anarchy. The judgment by Odunga and Goge sounded much like a political statement. It just fell short of saying that Uhuru's presidency was an illegality. In fact, by saying the president violated the constitution, the judges gave the green light for the impeachment of the president. But more importantly, if some of those high court judges sit in the dissolution of parliament case, they will fire Uhuru and parliament altogether. Take that to the bank. The question therein is, who would benefit from this? Who would benefit if Uhuru's term was cut short? And the answer is simple. It is Ruto. If David Day, who is Ruto's advisor, goes to court to stop BBI and gets 5 more prayers than he applied for before the court, who benefits? It is Ruto. If Joel Goge tells us that Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta violated the constitution, what is he telling us without telling us? He is implying that Uhuru is not the president, and if he is, he should be impeached. And therefore, if impeachment happens, who benefits? It is Ruto. If all these scenarios are true, why shouldn't we think that Ruto is plotting a judicial coup? Why should we hold the 5 judges in high regard? And lastly, why shouldn't Uhuru do an Erdogan and round up the 5 judges and weka them ndani?
Motto.
Weka them ndani.
They will be revisited. Now, as I had a premonition earlier, I had said that the Star would be our winning headline.
Oh yeah, it is.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I just wonder if you did not go to KVD accounts, where did the money go to?
Where did the money go to? Where did the money go to?
We'll find out when said CS gives his evidence, or maybe it will be a plea bargain.
Yes. It will unfold before us. The Star, in the meantime, is our winning headline. And now, on to our final thought. But before we get there, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that like button. So what is our final thought?
And now our final thought. It is inspired by the second industrial revolution.
The second industrial revolution was a phase of rapid industrialization that occurred towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It is generally dated between 1870 and 1914. The location of the second industrial revolution was America, and its cause could have been the natural resources from the newly acquired territories following the American Civil War, a growing supply of labor immigrating from Europe, and the migration of emancipated African Americans, also perhaps an expanding market for manufactured goods and the availability of capital for investment. Anyway, the second industrial revolution was the age of science public transportation, and mass production. Steel replaced iron in the building business, and because it was cheap and strong, facilitated the construction of ships, skyscrapers, and larger bridges. Steel also made it possible to build the railway lines at competitive costs, and this spread transportation. And the growth of the railway was also inextricably linked to the growth of the telegraph machine and later the telephone. This then ushered in the era of instant communication.
That's right.
The train was then replaced by the automobile, and Henry Ford revolutionized mass production in manufacturing with the introduction of the assembly line to produce the Ford T model. All kinds of goods also became standardized for the first time during this period. Household items like soap, butter, and clothing that used to be made at home started being made in factories.
That's right.
And the American federal government actively participated in this revolution by promoting industrial and agricultural development. High tariffs were enacted to protect American industry from foreign competition. Land was given to companies, railroad companies, to encourage construction, and the army was even deployed to remove native Indians from land that was wanted by farmers or mining companies. Either way, the second industrial revolution enabled globalization, and it created a rough draft of today's world. And it is said to have come to an end around the start of the Second World War.
Yes. Now, I want to bet you, Uhuru Kenyatta's biggest inspiration was the first and second industrial revolution. And that's because the first industrial revolution was powered by innovation and credit. And the second industrial revolution was powered by transport infrastructure, period. Now, railroads and steamships. In fact, America's access to the world was facilitated by railroads and steamships. Long-distance transportation networks connected by rail, steamships, and canals opened new markets for farmers, factory owners, and bankers who could bring America's natural resources to a global marketplace. For the first time, goods from the American heartland could be shipped long distances, eliminating the need for local bartering systems. And the reason that was the case is that before the development of these elaborate transportation and communication systems, economies were localized and often based on a barter system, like you said, Mrs. K. The transportation revolution opened up new markets for farmers, industrialists, and bankers who could now bring crops like cotton in the Mississippi River Valley, wheat in the Midwest, and manufactured goods in upstate New York into a global market based on credit. Similarly, the expansion of the railroad brought a dramatic reduction in the time and money it took to move heavy goods, creating new opportunities for wealth at a time when 2/3 of all Americans still resided on farms. And that begs the question, if Britain borrowed to make themselves the most industrialized country in Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, if America was built by rail, roads, and steamships, why shouldn't Kenya do the same? If SGR and expressways will open up markets in the DRC, in Uganda, in Congo, Brazzaville, Tanzania, Rwanda, name it, why shouldn't we borrow to build infrastructure?
Absolutely.
Why do our people and the media have third world mindsets? That our hope is wheelbarrows and not railroads and ports.
So well put. Such good fundamental questions. I get so upset. I don't even know what to say.
You have to stand up and say, preach.
Now, I'd like to talk about the world's largest manufacturing activity, the automobile industry. In 2020 alone, 78 million vehicles were produced. More have been produced actually in previous years. In 2014, for example, over 90 million vehicles were manufactured that year. And I'm going to tell you how this automobile industry evolved during the period of the second industrial revolution. And I'll stretch it a bit between the years 1850 to 1970. So it began with the horseless carriage, first patented by Karl Benz in 1886.
Yes.
In its early days, the auto industry was defined by craft production, meaning that highly skilled engineers and manufacturers tailored each individual car to a customer's taste.
Yes.
As they do now with high-end cars.
Yes, precisely. So this was slow and expensive, and thus few people could afford cars, and only some 1,000 vehicles were produced on an annual basis. However, as you said, Ms. K, Henry Ford at the end of the 20th century revolutionized the automobile industry. And he did this with the invention of the assembly line. So Henry Ford sat back and simply thought to produce more cars in less time. And he realized he could achieve this by designing cars with the same interchangeable parts and producing the parts separately instead of working on the whole car at once. So that whole idea of sequential versus simultaneous. You could do it simultaneously by looking at the problem differently. So with the innovation of mass production, a flood of cheaply produced American cars were now sold worldwide, and by the early 1930s, some 32 million vehicles were in use globally, and most of those were made by the three leading US companies known as the Big Three, not the Big Four, the Big Three, not the Big Five, the Big Three. Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. So Henry Ford's assembly line process, that dominated the automobile industry for about 50 years. But that gradually changed as European companies checked into the scene and they began to compete. Germany founded Volkswagen, as you know, France, Renault, and Italy, Fiat. And then a little known company from Asia entered the scene. In 1937, the Toyota family founded the Toyota Motor Company. Now, they were a little concerned that the family name Toyota sounded too traditional. Toyota means abundant rice field in Japanese. And so they exchanged the D for a T to create Toyota. Toyota was struggling to succeed, and during the 1940s, it got some state bailouts to keep it afloat, the way Kenya Airways keeps getting these bailouts. But things changed when Toyota engineers Taiichi Ohno and Eiji Toyoda paid a visit to the Ford Rouge factory in Michigan. And after discovering flaws in Ford's manufacturing process of mass production, Toyota decided to develop its own innovative plan. They called it the Toyota Production System, or TPS. TPS was essentially based on the values of what we today call lean production. The essence there is continuous improvement. In Japanese, this is known as Kaizen. And so the Japanese idea of Kaizen holds that processes are never perfect and can always be improved.
Like constitutions.
Like constitutions, absolutely, man.
That is sticky.
Now, this concept, it clashes with the assembly line process of I was going to say Tom Ford.
Henry Ford.
Henry Ford. Which we can see?
We can see where you buy your things, though.
Always Tom Ford. You can always go to the bank with Tom Ford. So this process of Henry Ford, it values continuous production above all else. Whereas this whole idea of the Japanese with lean production, TPS was all about the foundation from which then, the lean production emerged. And lean production works very well, largely because it's aimed at eliminating mistakes in the different processes. So in the 1980s, the lean production system finally triumphed, and Japanese manufacturers overtook their American counterparts to make Toyota the largest car manufacturer in the world today.
As they say in Kenya, the car in front is
always a Toyota. Absolutely, across the continent. So today we had a winning headline from the Star. But before we close the show and before I give the quote of the day, I would like to congratulate our first woman CJ, Martha KOOME. Congratulations for being finally gazetted. All the best, bon chance.
Absolutely.
As you execute your mandate.
Kenya's 15th Chief Justice. And I bet you someone will go with a petition to the JSC to ask for the removal of Deputy Chief Justice Mwilu. What's her name? I keep forgetting.
But I also think, Philomena Mwilu. But I also think that someone, even just for good measure, for nuisance, will just also say that because the history of the JSC has been that when you have a male CJ, you've had a female DCJ, that now that the opposite has happened, we would like to remove her from the DCJ position and have one of her male counterparts as DCJ. But
as well, if she's the one who assembled the 5-judge bench that shut down BBI, and she's the same person who assembled the the panel of judges that will discuss the dissolution of parliament,
Yes.
then
The revisitation.
revisitation must happen. And we know those games.
Yeah.
We know those games,
Absolutely.
but they will be handled.
Right. So today we've spoken about the second industrial revolution, and I would like to end with a quote from the management guru Peter Drucker. And he says, business has only two functions, marketing and innovation. And I would argue as well that politics has only two functions, marketing and innovation. Have a good evening.
Love it. God bless.